much for the introduction, and good afternoon to all of you. It's good to see many old friends in this meeting, and of course new people. Now, if you can please allow me to share my screen, that'll be helpful, because I want to just project first of all what I'm hoping to what I'll be working with.
Yeah, that's done. Yeah.
Okay. So I will be. So that's first of all of course I'm speaking in my personal capacity here, but of course a lot of the knowledge that I have that I'm sharing is coming from the work that my organization, Third World Network Africa, has done over the years. For more than 20 years. We're involved in working on this subject. And the Galamsey issue, we know is extremely topical. It's been bubbling for some time. But I want to, given the topic, the topic really invites us to look beyond Galamsey, even though we need to look at Galamsey. We need to situate that Galamsey discussion in a kind of wider context. So what I'm hoping to do in this presentation is just, first of all, kind of have a brief introduction on minerals in Ghana's political economy, and also in a global context. Have a little thing about public ownership, elite capture, and the role of the state, because I think that's quite central, to the issues around small-scale mining, and also really the regime, the place of minerals in our political economy. So I'll deal with that. Then I'll look at the production regimes, large-scale and small-scale mining, because really you can't have a discussion about Galamsey without situating it alongside and in contrast with large-scale mining, because although it is not articulated in the discussion, there's an unspoken assumption that the ideal type of mining is what large-scale companies do, and that the ASM, fall short of that, and somehow the large scale is better. But I think to have an appreciation of this larger political economy, I think it's important to discuss what LSM actually and so on. Then I'll go on to talk about the small scale mining, which is the heart of our thing. But I also think that there are some new frontiers of dispossession, which are emerging, which reflect some of the tendencies that we have had, for a very long time, which I want to touch on briefly, and then we can have the question of minerals and transformation and agenda going forward. Now, the first point I want to make about minerals in Ghana's political economy really is it's about the fact that what's my PowerPoint not functioning at this point? Okay, nice. Sorry. Okay. Now, first of all, I'm just giving you some figures about the place of minerals in Ghana's political economy. What is striking about it that this data just shows you how raw material commodity export dependent Ghana is. In that sense, actually with the addition of oil, we have become even more dependent on raw material commodity, exports. With minerals, very much the dominant component of that, gold and oil being a very kind of dominant share of that dependence. And this is important because it shapes a lot of the other relationships and discourses within the economy. I mean, the dominance of foreign capital in the mining and oil sector mean that really, and the country's dependence on those export earnings invariably leads to the kind of alliances that our ruling classes are willing to forge, because that's a lot of resources there, and also the reliance of the state on revenue from those sources is very critical, and therefore also the pandering to the primary interest of foreign capital is quite important in this larger conversation about about small scale mining. Now, this is just a continuation of those figures. This is a kind of a pie chart on the 2020 export earnings. You can see just what a large slice minerals, but primarily gold, represents in this. Now, the boom in small scale mining, actually, you can link to the commodity boom from the middle of the noughties. You can see from this graph that from about 2002 onwards, I mean, gold prices kind of went through the roof. And gold, of course, is the most sought after, mineral, even though, I mean, I like to say that it's one of the most useless minerals in terms of its kind of utilitarian value. But this is so the demand out there has been driving, the inflow of capital as well as the interest of small scale miners. Talking about the utility of gold, this pie chart gives an idea about what the gold that is produced actually gets used for. I mean, 47% so-called investment. That's basically people buy it and hoard it. Another 37% goes into jewelry. Central banks hoard another 7%. So it's 8% really that goes into any utilitarian thing. Of course, jewelry, depending on your point of view, is very utilitarian. It's a form of savings for people and so on. But this is important because when we look at the ecological footprint of all gold production, whether small scale or large scale, is quite substantial. So because this is important to frame the ecological impact discussion for the country, even before we come to the particular discussion about the particular discussion about Galamsey, and small scale mining. This is a table for you of just the production output. Of course, the gold sector is dominated by the conditions in the sector have been created primarily really for the benefit of large scale mining. I mean, the framework has tried to find a corner for artisanal and small scale miners, but it's exactly a corner. The overarching framework is very much for the advantage of large scale mining. We can come to a discussion about the regime, that facilitates the presence of small scale mining. But one of the consequences of that, therefore, is that really the best gold lands are available for large scale producers. We have instances now, particularly in northern Ghana, where areas that were reserved for small scale miners are being taken back by the Minerals Commission and being reallocated to large scale gold miners because of both this priority for foreign capital and also a certain notion that the state's fiscal take is more important than any other, economic return to the economy and society that comes from minerals. Now, if you look at the production, this table gives you an idea that really, I mean, small scale mining makes a very substantial contribution to the total gold production, in the country. So basically, a third of the gold that's produced in the country comes from small scale mining. We should hasten to add that a lot of what small scale miners produce, the economic returns stay in the country, whereas the large scale people, of course, export a lot of their capital. I mean, recently the Chamber of Mines gave us a figure that they repatriated 70% or so of their earnings. But when we look at that domestic spending, we have to further disaggregate it and ask what goods and services do they spend their money on? They do pay for labor, but a lot of the things that they buy out substantially come imports. So the connections with the domestic economy from this sector dominated the large scale sector, which has all the privileges. There are questions, to be asked about it. Now, I said a thing about the impact of gold production. This is a very interesting piece of information because, I mean, studies have shown that a large scale mine for each ton of gold that is produced from ore, which contains 3.5 grams of gold per ton. Non-refractory ores of the type that we have, in Ghana here, where they use cyanide, to dissolve the gold out of the ore. Now, the processing of a ton takes 260,000 tons of water. We are not talking about Galamsey here. We are talking about large-scale gold, and produces almost 1.3 million tons of solid waste. Okay, I mean, this ecological footprint is important because it is in the nature of the commodity that has that impact. Of course, small-scale miners have a more kind of a geographically extensive way of producing because they don't dig as deep. So you find that the mining companies, all the large-scale mining companies, they have water licenses which allow them to interdict rivers and divert them to use for washing their ore. Now, what this points to also is that really all gold production requires water. Okay, so in the old mining areas, the rivers have been dead for the longest time. If you go to Obuasi, all the rivers have been killed. You go to the western region in the concessions of the big mines, they have signs: please don't drink this water, don't swim in it, and so on and so forth. So gold production and water pollution and huge amounts of solid waste go hand in hand. We can have a different discussion about who does more restoration or not, but I think it's important to have this larger picture as we go forward with our understanding. Now, the issue of gold production and forest. I mean, this is a map of where the gold belts are in the country. As you can find, a lot of them are in this southwestern part of the country, the high forest area, which means that ASM as well as large scale, they are all located in the forest belt and having impacts on fragile ecology. We know that the large scale mines, by the last count, had been given concessions which cover more than 1 million acres of land, almost all of which is in the high forest area, including farms and so on and so forth. Now, I think this is a showing of the way the gold belt looks, in the southern parts of the country. You can see all the big mines, located, in these gold belts. We also find that in northern Ghana, the new mines are emerging, in the areas where now we have the belts, the Bole Nangodi belt in the north. I mean, I think this ecological frame is important because then it puts in perspective also the ways in which the ecological problems of ASM, important as they are, have been represented in a way which is kind of taken out of the context of the larger ecological challenge, that gold mining, poses for the country. Now, I just spoke about the acreage that the mines have. That's a 4,500 square kilometers. Another point I want to make is about the role of the military. The military have been involved in this exercise against small-scale mining from the PNDC period. The current drive that we have, this is the second Operation Vanguard Mark II, really is, we can say, the fifth militarized drive against small-scale mining. The PNDC had it, Kufuor had Operation Flashout, then the Mahama government in 2013 also launched a drive. In that period also, we had the burning, of excavators and so on, taking place. Now, so I think it's important to just have this context. So let me now come specifically to the issues around the regimes, of the thing in terms of the who gets what and who pays what price, in the gold sector. Now, the mining regime has been designed primarily to attract foreign investment. Okay, so very liberal terms of inflow or for capital inflows, incentives to bring in the goods that they need, labor and so on, and also to repatriate their earnings, and also to pay any things that they bought. So I mean, whilst gold has attracted about 12 going $15 billion worth of investment over the past 20 or so years, a substantial amount of that has been recovered, and a substantial amount of outflow also has gone out. Now, our governments have been very keen to fall backwards, to make life comfortable for companies. The most egregious example of that are the terms that the Kufuor government gave Newmont, in 2003, which some people regard to be so bad as to be almost unconstitutional, in some terms. The Newmont thing gave them, a ridiculous, fiscal framework, almost in perpetuity, because it was stabilized for 30 years, which meant nobody could touch it. And that became a kind of grenade, in the heart of the fiscal regimes, which made our governments decide that they should lower the floor for the fiscal regime to the level which, after the renegotiation, the Newmont thing was renegotiated by a committee headed by Professor Sawyer, and which involved a number of other people. But it tried to improve the Newmont thing. Now, curiously, at the height of the commodity boom, the government decided to alter the fiscal regime so that instead of a flat 5% royalty that companies were to pay, they made the floor now 3.5% and made 5% almost like a ceiling. I mean, that act, we believe, was illegal. This became something that we contested very hotly when the government gave Goldfields, a new framework in 2016. A similar thing happened when Anglo Gold Ashanti said it was rebuilding the Obuasi mine. The Obuasi mine is not one of the richest gold mines in the world. I mean, there's no risk involved in kind of, as it were, rehabilitating it. But the Ghana government was ready to offer Anglo Gold Ashanti so-called fiscal incentive, almost more than $200 million, which was a substantial part of the revenue that the government itself said was expecting. So when we look at the headline figures that we are getting so much fiscal return from the mines, we should remember how much the outflows are, because companies have a way of taking a lot of money out, and also the ridiculous willingness of our governments to lower even the fiscal framework so that we don't get anything near what we should be getting in terms of revenue. And if you put in the context of the ecological footprints that I'm talking about and the dispossession, of people that goes with a regime, then you understand what I'm talking about. Because the large scale mines, there's a presumption that once the concession is needed, then people have to be relocated and so on, and rivers are interdicted and so on. And in recent times also, we found that the labor regime in the large scale sector has deteriorated. You remember 2 years ago, there was a huge blow up at the Awaso bauxite mine when the workers burnt up the place, basically. This was because from years of having unionized labor, where people had good terms, suddenly all this was thrown out of the window, and across the large scale mining sector now, informalized labor, people are basically casualized. And in addition, also labor contractors, an increasing part of that. So in the bauxite, Ghana bauxite case, an example is a driver who used to earn 3,500 cedis a month, who in the new terms of this casualized labor was suddenly going to be earning 350 cedis a month. Those are the reasons why people burnt up the place, and this has become, and the protests in Goldfields and other places, because across the industry, this has become the norm. The government has been extremely supportive, of this regime. It's also created an opening for what they call so-called local content, which really is a perverse and absurd use of the term. Because what it has meant is that labor contractors have now interposed themselves between the workers and the companies. And, so the workers have become a unit cost, which is paid to the labor contractor by the firm, who then rents the labor to who gives the labor to the company. And of course, they keep quite a large chunk of what is paid to them. The workers are given a share of that. So so on the labor side also, we find this, kind of a regime where rights that have been won by workers over the years have actually been rolled back, in recent times. I mean, we know about the impact on community lives, displacement, people losing livelihoods. I mean, when more than 1 million acres of land in some of the best agricultural areas are taken, you can imagine what it means for the disruption, that people are suffering. And of course, governments leave this as something to be settled between communities and the mining companies. So that although what is a de facto kind of expropriation by the state, the legal regime is such that the government can claim that, well, they simply give a concession and the people are to move and the company has to pay them. I think a key demand that should be coming out of all this is that really going forward, this kind of regime has to change. And I think this dimension of this also is that increasingly there's a recognition that people must give free, prior, informed consent to any decision to give a concession to a company. This is very absurd. Although Ghana has signed up to a number of international instruments, this is not being done. And I think this is something also that we need to pick up in our work. And I think this issue is linked directly to the business of public ownership, private control, and the state as a vehicle for that private control. Because really, I think juridically, minerals are public assets, but they are managed by the executive without any accountability. Our parliaments have been completely complicit, in this. And I don't think in addition to making the demand in the context of what is happening when a concession is granted, I think we need to go back to the roots of what this public ownership should mean in terms of decision-making and accountability, and mechanisms like the free, prior, informed consent and also state accountability for people being displaced by concessions will be an important part of that. So, I mean, in this context, really, I mean, you find that the public ownership inures very little, it gives very little benefit to both who lived on top of the minerals, as well, of course, very little accountability for the revenues generated. I mean, the government's attempt to set up a JAPA, presumably to increase the benefits of the revenue, for which there's no accountability. It's just a dimension, really, of this unaccountable regime that I'm talking about in relation to the government and minerals. But the preference of government for large scale is because they can see a revenue stream that is accountable. Now, it is different for artisanal and small scale mining. And I'll move on now to speak about the artisanal and small scale mining sector. Now, this clearly is an area of largest employment because the artisanal and small scale mining sector, in the opening slide, I talked about it as kind of the need to differentiate. And that differentiation is important because in the discussion, there's a way in which there's a conflation of actors. The recent public discussion has shown us that there's a criminal elite of big people, who are involved in artisanal small scale mining. Really, these are wealthy people who prefer a criminal route to wealth in terms of being illegal small scale miners. But there's a vast majority of small scale miners for whom work in the artisanal small scale mining sector is just like the rest of the informal economy that we meet. At one level, the Galamsey people are not very different really from kids selling imported plastics in the traffic in Accra. Because the crisis of employment in the countryside, I think, is an important driver for some of the things that we are seeing, the boom in small scale gold mine, illegal small scale gold mining. But it is important, however, to also discuss the fact that part of the reasons why we have this problem with the artisanal and illegal with Galamsey is because even those who want to engage in legal small-scale mining face all kinds of hurdles. They face all kinds of hurdles because our governments have not been ready to establish the machinery, to allow to make it easy for people to become small-scale miners. So you find the institutional machinery for small-scale mining is very limited compared to the institutional machinery, for example, that's available for large-scale mining. The licensing process is very cumbersome. Very little area is reserved for them, and as I said earlier, even where it's reserved, is repossessed to be given to large-scale producers and so on. So in these drives that the government mounted in recent times, you find that the soldiers did not distinguish between illegal and legal small-scale miners. But just imagine for a minute, do you think that the government would invade the concessions of, say, Newmont and begin to ban, excavators in the way that the soldiers invade the concessions of Ghanaian, licensed small-scale miners and ban their equipment? They won't. So that itself tells you the hierarchies that have been set up by governments in terms of who they consider to be the primary actors for whom the mineral regime, has been set up. And also, there's a refusal to recognize that a lot of the people in Galamsey really are people struggling for a livelihood. We know that there are even farmers who are handing their farms over to illegal gold miners because the terms of trade have moved against them as farmers, and they feel that there's more a return to be gained from getting some gold out of their soil, than other means. So this is what frames the ASM situation. But I think we should also be interested in the dynamics within the ASM sector, because the labor relations in the ASM sector are quite oppressive. There are gender hierarchies, there are age hierarchies, there are the relationship between those who get the concession and those who are supplying labor, and so on and so forth. And also, there are also the environmental externalities for all of us. And the concern about water bodies and so on are important issues. Because as I try to show, all gold processing requires water. All gold processing requires water. And the Galamsey people, of course, I mean, just like any informal sector operator, their modus operandi means that you have a lot of ecological footprints which are left behind, which do not receive attention. And of course, in a situation also where the institutional mechanisms are not supportive of ASM, even those who are interested in becoming legal miners, have a difficulty. But I think the key thing to remember, though, is that the wider crisis of employment is a key factor in what we find in the ASM. But just a last point about the military in this exercise. I said earlier that soldiers have been involved in this exercise for a very long time. In 2017, the Chamber of Mines, the government, and the military high command signed an agreement under which all the large-scale mines now under full military protection 24/7. That again is in very direct contrast to the unleashing of the military against small-scale miners, legal or illegal. And the issue is important because this government in this recent phase has been ready to admit that it would use methods of impunity in relation to legal small-scale mining. 3 years ago, the government itself, in consultation with a range of interest groups, developed a framework that would create the space, hopefully for a win-win situation for small-scale mining going forward. This is a so-called MIP framework. That has been completely dropped. And I have no doubt that because there are some vested interests who are opposed to an equal status for small-scale mining in the gold sector. And I think this is an important issue in the context of the ecological challenges that all gold mining poses. Better engagement with the small-scale mining sector will reduce the negative externalities of Galamsey and bring more people into the kind of open space where they can earn a living. But fundamentally, however, I want to leave you with this question. Even as we are discussing the plunder, and the crisis and so on, we have to ask, really, should gold continue to have the status that it has in our lives? Because this dominance of gold also leads to a distortion in terms of what kinds of attention could be paid to other economic activities and even other sorts of minerals that could be more beneficial in terms of development and transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade, for this wonderful presentation. All right, so the floor is open for any questions, any contributions. If you have anything to add to what he said, the floor is open. Please, you can go ahead if you have anything to add to what he said.
Question. I didn't hear the name of the agreement that was abandoned 3 years ago that would have opened the space for a more regulated small-scale mining regime. You mentioned it, but I didn't hear it. Could you give us the name of the agreement or the proposed agreement or initiative?
Is the MMIP. I'll have to give you the full. I keep forgetting it's a rather strange name. The MMIP. There's even an 80-page document that the government developed. And although they said it is for small-scale mining, really it's very much focused on gold mining and not the whole of the small-scale sector. There's even the World Bank put some money towards it, and the last I heard, some of that money actually was misused, buying strange drones and so on but the interministerial committee that was set up for Operation Vanguard basically displaced the legal institutions for regulating the mining sector. And so a lot of the money went to the interministerial committee. And I hear the World Bank has set up an audit to try to find out what happened to the monies that was put, towards the MMIP. Is that Hibis? I see Hibis has your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a few questions following up on that. There was a pilot project that was being initiated in terms of getting local government to be involved in the artisanal mining and for them to act as kind of to encourage the formation of, if you will, units or groups to be able to operate in spaces where they organize access to equipment like excavators, and also providing areas where markets can be set up and so on. That was in Obuasi when the initial pilot project was being pursued. And in as much as one can anticipate the challenges with such a thing, I mean, what's your thinking on the potential for such an initiative? And also if there's any recent information on the progress with that. I'd like to also ask about the potential of also expanding the minerals focus away from gold and more into also thinking about the non-precious. And I think TWN has done very important work on salt mining and thinking about the ways in which that could be part of a transformative process for the economy and so on. So if we can frame if you can share with us what your thinking is on not only looking at precious minerals and gold specifically, but also broadly non-precious minerals and the way they can be thought through. So for instance, I would give the example of kaolin or clay mining, and say in a country like South Africa, where a community that has been excluded from the large-scale mining space and exposed to the environmental damage would then seek to, for instance, encourage the local economy, not the local economy, will encourage the local community to engage in clay mining, but with an effort to sort of link it to construction within their community and so on. So that in itself will have its own limitations if we're thinking about also trying to build towards, let's say, an industrial commons, like the potential for that. So we have like initiatives like in Zimbabwe where they set up spaces where there could be some processing of the gold that would be extracted from the alluvial gold, and that in itself helps to a certain extent. But to what point can we link it up more to more processing and so on? So, for instance, in South Africa, we have there's been they have a space where a company that basically engages in processing of ores, and this is a state established company, and it has been a space where the equivalent of the Galamsey here called the Zamazama, and they basically informally would send it's a refined gold refinery where they would send some of their gold to be processed and will sell directly to the state refinery. So in that sense, there's an inkling of what that could look like. On one angle, there's been a push for setting up open markets to kind of cut off the middlemen and create a space where there can be fair access to fair market prices. But can we think more broadly beyond this? Because it seems it doesn't fit into a broader, like industrial policy oriented kind of intervention. So if the state needs to have a different approach to it, what that can look like. Sorry, that was a very long-winded set of comments. Thanks.
May I ask another question? To what extent, if we are talking about potential diversification away from gold, which clearly is a medium to long term.
3 minutes each to speak, so everyone has a chance to also talk and ask.
Okay, so if indeed we want to diversify,
each person has to think.
May I continue my question? Oh.
Yeah, Dr. Idrisu, please.
I was asking that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Graham, and then your team, and then all the other colleagues for joining this program and for giving us the opportunity to dialogue and then have a great conversations around this critical topic, which is not affecting only Ghana, but is becoming an Africa or a global phenomenon. If we look at the statistics, our forest has been continuously degraded because of the activities of these illegal miners called Galamsey operators in Ghana here. But the interventions being rolled out by government of Ghana seems to always be ad hoc measures. They do not appropriately address the issue of illegal mining in Ghana. For example, recently, the destruction of the excavators used by these illegal miners has seen to be a short-term measure. So the critical question is, as a government or as a leaders who we fund with our taxes to be able to use to address developmental challenges and to improve the lives of the people, what new or innovative strategies should be put in place to help the policymakers and implementers to be able to find a lasting solution to this problem, not only in Ghana, but that of Africa in general? This is a critical question I've been thinking around for some time now. And I believe at the appropriate time, we need to sit down and then discuss more to see how we can strategize and come up with innovative, sustainable policies that will address these issues one and for all. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
All right, thank you very much.
Maybe if I can just respond very quickly to these couple of things, and also some things in the chat, then we can, Hibis, your thing about very specifically the Obuasi thing, that's an interesting example, because you know that when this initiative happened, for those who don't know, there's a time when the Galamsey people took over the underground mines in Obuasi, the Anglo Gold Ashanti mine, and it became a huge political crisis. So part of the settlement was to carve out part of the concession and relocate these guys. The mine workers, the Small Scale Miners Association got involved, as did some of the local activists. CESIS, which is a community group that we work with, they were involved with the local assembly. They worked and demarcated this area, and the people were moved out. Well, typically, that whole thing has come under pressure from politics. Other people wanted to take the place. Some people want, more powerful people want to have access to that land, and so on and so forth. So it has not become a model of how things could be done. On the other side, during the Operation Vanguard, the government announced an initiative for so-called community mining.
Okay.
Now, it sounds great in the name, but we need to look closely at what it actually means in practice. Because this, starting from having a regime, has no legal framework. What is happening is that these chief executives are demarcating land for people who are seen as political foot soldiers so that they can be engaged in mining activity. I listened to an interview with a leader of a community mining group the last time. And basically, I mean, he sounded like the people should be considered the legitimate miners as opposed to the small scale miners who have been licensed. So I suspect this group is being used to drive a wedge against all small scale mining, in the country. Now, Hibis, your points that you make, for me, it points to the fact that if you took a kind of a class and kind of a economic development view of it, the small scale miners are very much like a lot of domestic, enterprise. The top layers of our economies are dominated by foreign capital. And you find that in the mining sector also. Now, the possibilities of accumulation in mining, if we want to promote that, it's these small people who are the building blocks for that, who are going to be able, and who also have a lot of return, to the communities, and they create jobs and so on and so forth. Now, the refusal to pay attention to their needs, it's not simply a Ghanaian issue, but it's a continent-wide phenomenon. And in fact, increasingly, even in terms of debates about minerals and development across Africa, I mean, it's not like, say, the African Mining Vision that we're involved, in pushing for. One of the key things discussed is that really, in thinking about mineral regimes, small-scale, artisanal and small-scale mining should be given equal footing as large-scale mining, and their needs addressed with the same attention that large-scale mining needs are discussed. Now, this is a political challenge that has to be fought for. That has to be fought for. Yeah. So the delegitimization, the stigmatization of all small-scale mining, in the way the government is approaching this, makes it easy not to confront the need really to deal with this thing. That these are citizens who are trying to build businesses compared to large-scale foreign capital, which is sucking resources, out of our countries. Now, it is true that this thing about people destroying forests and so on needs to be dealt with. I mean, my simple answer, because there's no time to go through all that, we need a combination of short, medium, and long-term things. The criminal gangs really, who are the ones who are able to move excavators from one part of the country on flatbed trucks to another, and are being saluted by the police as they go across. That layer are the most destructive. They are the ones who they are dealt with, and also along the rivers, we may be having a start in terms of the worst, the kind of ecological impacts. The long and medium term really is located at the level of the livelihoods crisis, which is facing a lot of people in this country. Unless you deal with that, it's going to be difficult, to move very far on it.
Okay, Naile. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. Now, before you come here, I would like to make a suggestion. What I think we should do is to take 2 questions at a time. When you are done with the 2 questions, the speaker will come and answer. Then we take the next 2 questions. So anyone who has a question, who wants to ask a question, should please click on the hand. That will show that you have a question. Then the chair can ask you to ask your question.
I think Alasan's hand is up.
Great. At this address.
Yeah, thanks.
So first, Al-Hassan.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Degree. This is really interesting discussion here. You said it very well, Degree, when you said the whole thing about illegal miners is just a symptoms of what you see people on the street, the young people on the street selling by roadside. And I remember we still have this issue within the forest sector of so-called illegal chainsaw operators, and then you have what is happening in Songolada. Basically, for me, is that communities are not benefiting from whatever mining is happening. And then now it is being taken to a lower level. Still, Galamsey is not benefiting everybody in that community where it is happening. But at least the wealth goes a bit spread around some few people. So in looking at Galamsey, it's not just about gold mining or diamond in Akwatia, is to look at the whole extractive industry as a chain, from salt to forests to the mining. Indeed, you referred to the past years about military interventions. I remember when Adukufo was the Minister for Defense, we went to Adukufo and raised the issue about militarization of the mining sector, and they did not respond positively to what we were recommending. And today, they are the ones kind of talking again about de-escalating of these things. So for me, it's about taking a big picture of all the extractive industry and try to address the question of royalties. Where does it go? How much the mining companies are allowed to extract and repatriate and all this. And so long as we don't have a balanced economy where profits are retained in the country for development, we'll keep having this, whether NDC or NPP is in power, it will not resolve it.
All right, thank you, Al-Hassan. So iPhone X, please, you can unmute yourself now and give us your question or contribution.
Okay, I wanted to find out from Mr. Graham, Dr. Graham, that if indeed in the medium to long term, it's possible to diversify away from gold, or just purely an extractive rule for gold rather than the value addition, refining, jewelry, and so on. What are the candidates that possibly could be possible alternative minerals that the country can pursue in terms of added value and so on? And related to that, how much of our land surface has actually been geologically surveyed so that we know really what is where, by way of potential minerals that probably are less damaging to the environment and also probably more constructive in terms of developmental perspective?
I think the couple of things. Alasan, thanks for your your thing. You're absolutely right about the scope of the discussion. I focus what the discussion ought to cover. I focus on the goal because that's where the intense drive. But I also made a point at the beginning that salt is a frontier for dispossession. I hope there'll be time to say a bit more about that. But the issue of what is happening in the sector and the militarization, I think it's important. And also your point about it's not everybody who is benefiting is important, because we have to accept that the ecological, the unregulated activities, okay, what happens with the large scale producers is that they can go maybe 100 feet deep because they are following the ore load all the way down. Although they have cordoned off more than 1 million acres on which nobody can do anything. In terms of where they're actually digging at any time, tends to be more concentrated. But when they also wash their ores, the amount of water they use is a lot more than the small scale people do. But the running off of water from small scale people into the rivers, as opposed to the large scale people who construct these tailing dams behind which they retain the thing, allow some short-term, relative security on some of those things. But I've also said a lot of rivers have been polluted by the large scale people. Their thing is less dramatic in terms of the turbidity, that is the mud and so on in it. But it doesn't mean that those rivers are any cleaner in terms of use. So the effect of that, and also of course, mercury pollution, which is very dangerous, is another issue that I think we need to accept to be a problem. So those things need to be dealt with. And it's a combination really of preventing some things from being done and also creating alternative avenues, going forward. I mean, the thing about how much of the country has been surveyed is relevant here, because that map that I showed you earlier, gold covers those gold belts cover 1/6 of the country's landmass. So it is our fortune or misfortune to have so much gold, around the country. So, I mean, so that remains an attraction. And I think it also makes more difficult the project of trying to reduce the importance of gold in the absence of alternative livelihoods for people. Okay, because the boom in the large scale mining has been kind of, and the small scale have been almost kind of parallel, with the price of gold. So the alternative livelihoods thing, it's very important for being able to deal with the challenge posed by the kind of a negative social and environmental impacts of gold, in the country. Just a brief thing about salt, since I last time mentioned it. At this very moment, the Ghana government has given away the whole of the Songo Lagoon, 158 square kilometers, to Macaulay, MacDan group of companies who have no experience of any salt production. Now, we are engaged in some work at the moment, trying to mobilize against this on a number of grounds, starting with the fact that uniquely, in 1991, the government at that time got into a compact with the local people and developed what they call the master plan for salt production in Ada, which was a framework which allowed the coexistence of small scale, cooperative, and large salt producers in a scheme which also was fitted into a notion, of industrial use of salt. I mean, what we can do with any minerals what we can do with diversification really is a function of mineral endowment. And I think salt is one mineral which has potential in terms of its value in other industrial processes. We also clay for building and so on. But it's a variety, of other minerals. But there's no policy for minerals except minerals that bring fiscal returns. And I think this has been an important reason why we have this lopsided, focus on gold. Talking about, again, back to the thing about how much of the country has been surveyed, just to illustrate to you the way in which minerals get primacy. The Volta Basin, which is 40% of the country's land area, which covers the Volta Lake area, is currently a frontier for oil exploration. And the government actually believes that it can find a way to produce oil in the Volta Basin without, repeating the lessons that have been, the mistakes that have been learned, in other parts of the world.
Hello. Hello.
Okay, thank you very much. Please, Julius can unmute himself and pose a question or contribution.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Julius.
Please,
I'm
we have 3 minutes maximum.
Thank you. I'm Julius. I'm joining you from Ada. And then just as Dr. Graham said, I just want to be grateful to him. He's been so much helpful in our help. I'm with Radio Ada. But my fear in all these fights against Galamsey and the position taken by government emanates from experience that we've had with our salts in the Adansongo Lagoon. For instance, in the past, the resource has been a communal resource, but as population increased, people started mining the wrong way. So we as a radio station started an advocacy where we started educating people and putting pressure on people to desist from bad mining practices. Now, just as at the time we were about winning the fight so that we can come together and implement, or cause government to implement the master plan, then government give out the resource, the whole resource, to a private entity, that's Electrochem, led by Dr. Adam Macaulay. We were so much disappointed, and the reason why, and it makes the whole thing skeptical for me, even how they are treating the Galamsey issue. There is a possibility that immediately we finish winning the war on Galamsey and doing away with artisanal mining, government may end up giving such areas to organization or bigger organizations, and we'll come back to the whole thing. Government has not put itself in a position to be trusted when it comes to the way they deal with this, and the means by which they even breach their own laws so far as this particular fight is concerned is what's so much of worry to me. For instance, the one I'm talking about in Adansongo Lagoon, clearly you could see that government is breaching its own laws when it comes to PNDC Law 287 and what it has asked that should be done with a resource. Now, they even did this without the consent of the people. And as we speak, the security agencies are supporting the people against the community people. And you have a high rate of unemployment around where people think that is sort money. So at the point in time, we had a radio station who was trying to do this advocacy work, have become the target of the people because they thought that we forced them to stop the artisanal sort money, only to give it out to government, to give it to multinationals. So I am so much afraid. The steps government is taking when it comes to the Galamsey, and I'm skeptical as to whether government will not repeat what it is doing in Adan here, which will cause the Ghana as a whole to lose. That's my fear. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, before the speaker addresses Julius, we have 4 more hands up. That's Jasper, John, Leonard, and Jeche. So please, these are the 4 who are going to speak before the speaker comes back on. And please, each comrade has 3 minutes each to pose their questions.
Jasper, I think you have to go.
I didn't hear that, sorry. Thank you, Dr. Graham, for that insightful presentation, especially tracing the history of the militarized operation against Galamsey, and then drawing the distinctions between the various actors and classes involved in this so-called illegal industry. It's very important to always draw the distinctions, the distinction between the actors involved, because the tendency to lump industrial mining or semi-industrial mining done by what we can basically call the capitalist class, both foreign and local, with struggling people, I mean, mining with pans and pickaxes. I mean, it's one of the injustices that the state can do to, and other analysts normally do to struggling people, which is clearly a case of class relations, I mean, power relations, in which the subaltern classes always get the short end of the stick. But what is troubling is the increasing contempt with which the state treats knowledge in this sector, because I mean, it's not lack of knowledge that is the cause of this problem, where the government keeps taking the wrong steps. But it's just about ignoring the what research has proven, that this militarized operation doesn't work. And like Dr. Graham has traced the history, and with myself being a policeman in the 1980s, having been involved in this militarized action, clearly it shows that it doesn't work. And just to see the state repeating this same military action in the name of Operation Halt really surprised me, and just seems like the state doesn't care about whatever activists say, scholars say, what they themselves, they are even their own policies say, that like Dr. Graham is pointing out, even in their own policies, they clearly state the way in which this militarized action doesn't work, and the way politics is to blame for what is happening. Yet they keep repeating the same strategy of brutalizing even legal small-scale miners, and then struggling classes struggling to survive. So I'm just wondering whether we can. I'm just thinking, what can we do as activists and scholars to, as far as this problem is concerned, especially
So go and draw the table very well. And the
protect the lower classes who are always getting the short end of the stick. Thank you.
Yes, so the speaker can address them now before the other ones come in with their contributions.
Quickly, I mean, yeah, Jasper, thanks. I mean, what do we do? I think there's a range of things that, you know, can be done. I mean, first of all, I mean, there's an impunity part of this whole exercise, because, I mean, we are getting across the board, you know, growth of intolerance, authoritarianism, you know, and impunity, whether it's, you know, people in a meeting around gay, you know, rights, who get rounded up and charged with some never clear to me offense as just an act of intimidation. The president saying that it's okay that we break the laws we enacted ourselves on seizing equipment rather, and instead, you know, burning them. You know, you can cite any range of things. People rejecting a JAPA and they insisting they will come back, you know, with it. There are many. So that we need to draw a connection between the authoritarianism and culture of impunity, you know, of the regime, which is also being expressed, in this sector, and be clear about it, because people have spoken out about the way they are suffering, and also their rights are being violated. It happened with Operation Vanguard. It's continuing. It's becoming institutionalized. The military are calling for more freedom, to carry the fight to Galamsey people and so on. And there's a lot of impunity around that. There's also the question about the differentiation, which I think needs to be pressed. So there are some very immediate, things that raise questions about the method with which the government is dealing with this problem, without saying that we don't need to take steps, to deal with preventing the pollution of the water bodies and so on. But we need to also keep pressing to bring to the fore the more fundamental drivers, of this problem. And we are not getting any policies which really are interested in addressing those kinds of questions. I mean, those are things that require kind of broader engagement and mobilization and so on. And then there are also the things about development policies which frame what the outcomes that are good for ordinary people, and the ones which are not. Which I think Ibis pointed to some of the issues around sectoral linkages, industrial policy, support for local businesses, whether it's credit, whether it's marketing, and so on and so forth. So there are a whole range of things. I just want to say a quick thing about the Adan thing. I mean, the example, Julius, your thing about Achiakpo, which is the so-called Galamsey, where people are working in the bed of the lagoon, which is destroying the source of the salt. I mean, I think it also highlights in the Adan case the fact that 30 years on, the government had failed to implement the compact we have with Adan people to develop that resource, which is the biggest potential source of salt in West Africa, in a way that created opportunities for local people. And they kept going around looking for opportunities that would be in the classic mode of dispossession. Find some large scale producer who would take over the whole thing, as part of some crony deal and so on and so forth. So people continue to try to earn a living, in the bed of the lagoon, destructive as it is. But I think we should connect that problem of the lagoon back to also government failures, not simply in relation to the implementation of the master plan, but also the fact that the reason for the state of the lagoon is because after the Volta dams were built, the flow of water changed, because the lagoon used to be replenished annually by inflow from the sea. Sandbars have formed at the mouth leading to the lagoon. So the salty water does not come in, and the lagoon is literally dying. It's been dying, since those dams were built. The companies that were producing salt found a solution for themselves, built a seawater intake that went into their salt pans and left the rest of the lagoon to die, which points to why that solving that problem long term must be part of a public policy approach, where the repair of that ecological damage really is treated in the same way the government is investing in cocoa roads. Invest in restoring the health of the lagoon in a way that creates the opportunities for people as part of a different strategy, for developing the lagoon. Because this agreement with Electrochem, when you read the business plan, it is basically, here, take the lagoon, do what you like with it. And the man's business plan is explicit that they will expel the villages along the lagoon. We have identified 39 villages who fall into the concession that, if they had their way, they'll kick out. And there are no plans for any resistance. They just have vague promises. And this went to Parliament. Parliament got the document on the 4th of November. By the end of the 4th of November, a committee has sat on it, passed it. I mean, it's a travesty. This is, so if you guys hear that there's more and more trouble coming out of Adan, you should understand, what is happening there. There's a point that I missed, which was about the value addition and downstream issues around gold. I mean, it's a possibility, But I think we should also recognize that the accident of Ghana being endowed with gold also means that whilst we could produce a lot of gold, the limitations of gold as a kind of shall we say, a raw material would still be with it. What do I mean? You saw the pie chart that I gave you, which shows that, more than 80% of the thing. Jewelry is the one area where you probably can do a lot of downstream. But when you look at the various studies, because jewelry is a very culturally specific product, the biggest markets are China and India for gold jewelry. People make those jewelry for very particular purposes. So it's linked also with cultural dynamics. So whilst you may get the possibility of people being interested in allowing Ghanaian producers to produce jewelry that they will consume, the chances are that those markets will prefer to buy gold and turn it into jewelry. The markets where we can export jewelry to, I suspect that that's more than medium term, and you're likely at best in the medium term to find some niche markets. So yes, you can get some value addition, but in the nature of the mineral itself, it imposes limitations on how much downstream you can get. It's not comparable, let's say, to the downstream of, say, copper or aluminum or other industrial minerals. This is a precious mineral with a very narrow and limited downstream, with very specific cultural markets where people would prefer, if it's kind of a forthcoming Hindu festival, to get some local jeweler to make the thing for them, and so on and so forth, particularly in those two very, very big markets. And the place like the Gulf, where there's a lot of trading in gold, is actually to move it to those markets so that people can produce them into the products that they want.
All right, thank you very much. So please, perhaps Lesoko, you can unmute yourself, and then you have 3 minutes at most.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Also, thank you for inviting me to this very informative webinar. My name is Paps Letogo. I'm joining you from South Africa. I'm a national chairperson of National Association of Artisanal Miners, the Galamsey. Here we are calling them artisanal miners. So our government has, in our country, the artisanal miners have been illegal for quite some time, since the beginning of mining in South Africa. So Dr. Graham, I also want to know from you that our government has done a comparative study, and they are currently in a process of formalizing the sector and decriminalizing the sector. So our government has done a comparative study. According to them, what they are saying, they have done a comparative study in Ghana. And what I would like to ask from you with regards to Ghanaian policy and regionalization of artisanal small-scale mining. I would like to know, with regards to licensing regime and administration of artisanal miners, of how the policy in Ghana it works in terms of licensing regime and administration, and also the demarcation of artisanal small-scale mining area. And also on that, I also like you to shed the light on access to land, because also the issue of land in South Africa is a very, very problematic issue, since we don't have too much access to land due to apartheid and the wrongs of the past. And also, I would also like to know, with regards to institutional and support mechanism to artisanal small-scale miners association. And also, I will also like you to shed the light on how the Ghanaian government go on with regards to taxation and the royalty regime. For the interest of time, I will pause there. Though I do have many questions, I will also like you to share with us your email and presentation afterwards. Thank you.
Yes, please, Comrade Yao, please go ahead and address.
Chair, can I humbly suggest that because that maybe the other people, I will just take it and add it, and then we can wrap up because there are about four people, because it's also 5:20. Yes. Yes. I think Johnny Kwajo and others had their hands up, Jechi and others.
Okay.
Yes.
Many thanks, Comrade Chair, and many thanks, Dr. Graham, for the presentation. I would want to start off by saying that any kind of mining that destroys forests and water bodies should be condemned by all, and that should go for both small and large-scale mining, legal and illegal mining. And then also to ask from Doc whether it would be right to say that the livelihood and economic costs are kind of linked to the ecological costs. Because I'm thinking that the livelihood issues also feeds into the ecological issues. If you have a situation where government has ceded off huge tracts of land to big multinationals and raising the bar for participation in the mining sector so high for communities and ordinary groups, then you leave some of these communities with very little options, especially where other means of livelihoods available to them are also taken away by the operations of the large-scale mines. So basically, so want to know whether the two are connected. And Doc also mentioned that the livelihood issues are long-term. That is, if we want to deal with them, which I agree. But then doesn't that also postpone to the long term in terms of our ability as a country to deal with the issues of illegal mining, because we are not addressing the core problem. And I mean, we have so much appetite coming after the small scale miners who are left with nothing to survive on. I think we should have the same appetite to rally some support for them to ensuring that they have alternative livelihoods, to ensure that the penury situation that they live with in their communities that make them so vulnerable, for them to collaborate with some of these outsiders who comes in with the excavators and things to destroy their own communities. Some of these conditions are removed, because I believe if there are proper and adequate sources of livelihoods for these communities, they will not be participating, colluding with some of these gangs, as Doc referred to some of them. So add the two, the livelihood and economic cost link to the ecological cost. And can't we immediately, maybe government is not ready, but then citizens should be ready to push is to push for some kind of justice for communities in which you have these activities, and in fact for the whole country. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard. John Kwejo, please you can unmute yourself.
Okay. I'd like to first congratulate Degree for mounting this very important discussion again, and especially for the long years that you have been at this particular subject matter. And especially because of that, when we talk about small-scale artisanal mining, I mean, if the people within the mining communities are not organized into some kind of mining cooperatives specifically assisted to do so, it doesn't seem to me they will be in any kind of position to compete with any of the other interest groups that are involved there. For me, it seems to me that the issue really is about empowering people at those mining areas, organized, provided with engineering capabilities and financing, so that control over the mining activity can be directed towards where we want it to go. This kind of asking for artisanal miners to compete among themselves, and then they go and bring Chinese to come and assist them, and somebody go to bring this and that, and that seems to me to work. I'm aware, of course, that there are no political actors currently that seem to be interested in cooperatives or cooperative mining, self-reliant cooperative mining as such. But for purposes of educating the population and providing alternatives to what currently exists, is it possible to introduce the question of actual cooperative mining into the debate? In Ghana, for example, at this time, do you think, Degree? That's the question I'd like to ask.
Okay, thank you very much, John. And after him, Seidu can unmute himself, after which Cheche will be the last person to speak before the speaker comes back on.
All right. Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity. Comrade Yao Graham, Dr. Yao Graham, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm a development communication journalist, and I've been working in the Upper West region for the past 20 years. And I have found that one company, which is a foreign company called Azuma Resource, has been given all the mining rights in the region here. The description is that, if you know Upper West very well, is stretching from Wa, which is the regional capital, all the way to Hamili, the northern part of the region, which is about almost getting to 100 miles of the country, from west, north, south, and east, all over. Now, the trouble we have in the Upper West region is that small artisanal miners have a problem of operating because of the rights given to Azuma. Now, there's a problem with the level of transparency when it comes to the operations of this company. Don't be deceived by the name Azuma Resource. It's an Australian company that has been operating in Ghana, Upper West region for the past years, about since 1993 or so. And the doctor spoke about 2017, where there's an agreement. The government has given mining companies some military support. And I've seen that happen here. Now, many of these small companies or small artisanal miners, or do you call it, Galamseyers, have attempted in their own ways to regularize their operations by getting licenses to operate legally. Because of the super heavy presence of this foreign company that is in the region, it's a bit difficult for these guys to be able to operate the way they want to. And I've seen in some areas, for example, when you go to Nadil Khalil area around Charpon, Tako, and other places, there are skirmishes, and it doesn't help the region. Now, it's an agrarian economy where majority of the people here are farmers. And sometimes this company, they take away people's lands without compensation, farms, and all those things. So I want to find out from Doc. Doc, you've been in this field for Azuma resource in the Upper West region. To what extent have their presence improved the living standard of people? And what is it that they are not allowing local people to also be engaged in mining activity? Because what is happening here is if care is not taken, one day as a development communication practitioner, I see a situation where it can explode despite the presence of these military or whatever they call it. And if you go to Wa East, there's an area there where another mining company, which is trying to also penetrate, and it's difficult. They are even trying to do it with license. But the presence of this foreign company, which means that everywhere they are, from the Black Water all the way to the eastern part of the country, from west to east, south, north, everywhere, they are supposed to be in charge. So what is it that they are, what sort of agreement have they entered with the Ghanaian government that gives us so much land to operate or so much space to operate that our indigenous people cannot have access? And that's number one. Number two, why is that when some of these things are happening, our local farmers are not given the respect? One, by saying that, look, this is indeed, we know in Ghana, every mineral under or upper belongs to the president, and he must do that in the name of the people. But there is a need for somebody who earns his livelihood from the soil to be respected well enough to say, look, indeed, it's your land, take this away, and I also mine my company. It doesn't happen. All we hear and see is that this land, there's gold here, clear off, and I'm doing my work. I think that's not good for us. Also, sometimes what the people also here do is that these local, they also follow closely when these people are prospecting and when they must find gold. So what do? They jump in and there are conflicts. So Doc, I want us to throw more light on the Upper West situation because it's been very quiet. Nobody talks about it. We try to highlight it. It's not easy. You are into the field. What is it that is happening in the Upper West region that Ghanaians, and for that matter, the people of the Upper West region are not so much aware of the operations of Azuma resource? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade. Comrade Jeche can come on now, after which the speaker will come and give us final comments and answers to all that came on. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Na, and thanks, yeah. I think this has been an important, learning moment, learning session for a lot of the participants, including certainly for our own members in the SSW and in the ISO. So yeah, thank you for that. Of course, we recorded the session and we will use it as a resource. And I hope you share your slides as well and make yourself available for further conversations and debates on this. So I think it's been great. A couple of points though. The first is about agency. I think a number of people have referred to that directly and indirectly. We look at the situation with ASSM, the small scale mining, Galamsey, and so on. One of the things that it is clear from what you've said, Yao, is the structural subordination of local actors, local entrepreneurs, and local miners, small scale miners, and so on. But the fact does remain that and therefore that's an important point to take into account in terms of the way forward and in terms of looking at what's the constituencies that have an interest in the radical reform of what is a fairly desperate situation and a full-scale disaster. Okay, so those radical steps are required. But on the other hand, I think that people like Jasper and co have referred to the question of class, because here we are with a situation that confronts the national economy as a whole, which is that by and large, local entrepreneurs, and indeed foreign investors are invited into the economy partly on the basis of one, cheap labor as an incentive, and two, industrial peace, so to speak. Okay. Now, for local capital, smaller local capital, which has less capital than the big industrial mining companies, which has less technology than the big industrial and other mining companies, cheap labor is a necessary, if you like, precondition for their survival and for their viability. So the possibility and the potential that there can be a conflict between cheap labor and cheap labor, which is increasingly generated by people being displaced from their land for a variety of reasons, the collapse of agriculture being one. I mean, you know all the reasons, I don't need to go into them. So in that case, so far, a lot of the conversation has been about, the upliftment of local mining vis-a-vis the subordinated position that it systematically suffers vis-a-vis foreign transnational mining and so on and so forth. But that leaves out the question of, cheap labor in general, and therefore the kind of the most unifying agency, the most important majoritarian agency, and the most unifying constituency, the biggest constituency around whose agenda can be a unifying agenda. Because this question is not simply about the Galamsey, as you yourself have said. We all know that the land resource, the grab of natural resources, especially land-based natural resources, as well as the increasing lack of viability of small-scale petty production on the land and through natural resource activities, means that there's also a conflict between different sections of the population below. The Fulani herdsmen, pastoralists, agricultural settled farmers, that's one dimension of it. It takes on an ethnic dimension as well. The cheap labor dimension takes on a gender dimension as well. So the thing really is, what I'm driving at is that on the one hand, there's this question of agency, because at the heart of the one unspoken question at the heart of it is the super exploitation, which is in the title of the meeting itself. The second is about the property regime, the property rights regime, because here you are that since obviously the mining boom and the commodities boom, everybody who can lay a claim on land and concession out something or make money, whether it's a family head or a chief or whatever it is, they are doing so in a rampant way. Johnny Kwajo raised the issue of cooperatives again, but we look at a situation like Songo and the women there and the Achapo people that you referred to. On their own, they seem too weak to be able to do that. So what type of interconnections is necessary both to address this property regime, and what kind of property regime do we want to see in place? Alassane, I think, posted a comment in the chat about the way in which union leaders in the formal mining sector have been very quiet in terms of the weakening of their members' position in terms of the flexible labor regime that has been introduced into industrial mining. And he even implies that some of them are basically sellouts, so to speak, in the sense that they sold out their members. It won't be the first or the last time that union leaders in different parts of the world, including in Africa, where rank and file movements are very weak and not very independent, that can happen. So what alliances, what demands around which the property regime can bring the alliances that can, give straighter latitude to the relatively marginal, isolated communities who may be extremely heroic, like in Songo and so on and so forth. But what is the property? So those twin things, the property regime, the cheap labor regime, how do we have demands around them that can unify it and give greater impulse and greater centrality to the class dynamic from below? Certainly, I think it's a question that impinges on the whole regime. And we as socialists, obviously, we have a specific interest in that. And we have a specific interest in it in terms of opening up the entry points for activists to become more fully engaged on this question. Thanks again, Yao, and please share your slides. And as we've warned you already, we'll be calling you back for further chats. And everybody, please, you can leave your contacts for those of you who want to join the International Socialists. Not many of our members have spoken this evening, but it doesn't really matter. You know where we're about, and leave your contacts. We can continue that conversation. Yeah, thanks once again. And now, thanks. Back to you.
I think, Jesse, thanks. I would. There are some questions that people ask, which I think I should quickly respond to. The brother from South Africa asked a question about the Ghanaian situation. I mean, the important point is that the Ghana government legalized small-scale mining in '89 recognizing, in a way, of course, the history is a bit different, although the mining regime in colonial times tried very much to create the monopoly for foreign, which was mainly white capital, similar to what was existed in South Africa. But if you are looking at the lessons from the Ghana thing, I think there are some important similarities that we need to draw, some lessons that we need to draw attention to. I mean, for example, the access to land for small scale mining is a problem. I spoke about the fact that even land given to ASM is being taken and given to large scale producers. The small scale miners have been demanding that the entry requirements be simplified and decentralized, and the processes become, less bureaucratic. They don't have enough technical support to actually evaluate the quality of areas that they are given, so that they are sure that their investments will be worthwhile. There are questions about credit. There have been issues about technical support, for example, in terms of moving away from the use of mercury. Efforts have been made to introduce people to new ways of processing their ore without using mercury. But people have had difficulties because they have all kinds of explanations for some of the challenges that they have faced. So, and institutional mindset and the attitude of the state still treat them very much, as a stone in the shoe of large scale mining. But having said that, there are some important things that I think can be picked from here. I mean, people are organized, and they have their associations, and there's a marketing regime through which people are able to sell. They find access to credit very difficult. Increasingly, relations with government have become strained because some of the methods, and rights abuses which have accompanied, this initiative, which has been taking place. But this is an area on which we can continue a conversation, and I can even put you in touch with the Small Scale Miners Association. I'm sure they'll be quite ready to share things with you. We are planning ourselves later in the year to organize a conference on artisan and small scale mining in West Africa. We had originally conceived it as a continental thing, but in the circumstances, we downgraded it, and it will be open to allowing participation of comrades from the rest of the continent to also share experiences. So that could be another moment. I mean, Leo, your point about the dispossession by the concessions, it's key, and the point also about the way, I mean, connect back to the point made from by the comrade from Upper West. You see, the legal regime is inherently dispossessing, in the sense that the idea of the state's eminent domain, meaning that if the government decides to give your land to somebody to mine gold under the land, then your surface rights are expropriated effectively. Although there's a fiction that your surface right is not expropriated, is the underground, which is given to the person, and the person who is coming to mine can negotiate, how much payment, he would give for your land. I mean, this is a regime that I think we need to challenge in terms of the government's obligations to people, in terms of being the primary actor who actually undermines people's rights. Secondly, the issue of public ownership, I think, should feature. It should become a dimension of how we approach, these questions. Because if the public, although it's now notional, but we can make it a bit more substantive, that means that all citizens, as co-owners of this resource, their welfare should be a key factor in how these things are approached. We bring in things like the free, prior, informed consent, and other strategic assessments before you even get to the point of concession. We should be able to get to a point where it is said that certain areas are mining free zones for social, ecological, and other reasons. But I think yes, mining. So this is connected with my point about how much we should exclude areas from mining. But an interesting thing about deforestation in this country, again, is connected with the primary commodity export dependence, but not mining. Because cocoa production has been the biggest factor of deforestation in this country historically, as cocoa farmers look for virgin forest frontiers to raise productivity. The cocoa industry moved from the eastern region into Ashanti, into BA, into Central, into Western, consuming more and more forest. So this whole thing about commodity export, expresses itself, in a number of ways. I think it's also important in this conversation to pull out one element: the state, capital, and chiefly alliances, which are very important. Jechi talked about family heads and so on. But chiefs, who claim community leadership, but who objectively have become, important instruments of dispossession and oppression in extractives, I think is something we need to pull out, in this conversation. I mean, Johnny, your thing about co-ops is an extremely, important point, as something to inject into the conversation, alongside whatever we are doing in terms of the amelioration of the status of the Ghanaian actors who are in the sector. I mean, the points I made earlier about the powers of the state. I mean, the question about benefits that people have got. Quite frankly, the government has been very heavily focused on fiscal return. And if you look at the ecological and social and economic benefit at the level of the population, quite frankly, I think the balance sheet, is negative, because the compensation that's been paid in general has been derisory, and a lot of people have not been able to put their lives back together, when they have been dispossessed. Upper West. Actually, the whole of the northern Ghana and the upper regions have become the new frontier. The new frontier. In the colonial times, there was a mine in Nangodi, which closed after the Second World War because the IMF's $35 an ounce price of gold meant that it became uneconomic. But all those areas are now, up. In fact, we've been working with some colleagues in the Upper East region who are engaged in this struggle against Shansi and others in the Talensi area. We even had a workshop in Bolga in February last year, and there's the need to pick up the emerging organization in northern Ghana. I think we need to effect a junction with some of the experience that has been accumulated in the south to work together. Because what you describe is just a continuation of this assumption that once a mineral is found, which is of interest to some big investor, then human beings don't exist. People's lives, go out, out of the window. Whether it's a Macaulay, a party stalwart, in Adan taking over the lagoon, or a group of people seeing the upper upper west and upper east, as new frontiers and so on. So I think we need to effect a junction, to work on these things. Otherwise, some of the things that could be prevented or changed would just end up not deploying the experience. And I think Jechi's point about agency is particularly important here. And on the point of agency, Jechi, you're absolutely right, because the labor relations within the small scale sector point to the need also, particularly in the former small scale sector, for people to have more clearly demarcated and protected labor and other rights, and the communities protected against impacts not dissimilar to what we talk about in relation to the large scale people. I mean, within the illegal sector, I mean, those suffer the same challenges as all the informal sectors which are outside the realm of regulation. So I mean, the kind of self-organization, the highlighting of the challenges that arise there and so on are very important. And finally, when I talk about short, medium and long term, I was not for a moment saying that therefore we park the question of people's livelihoods until we've cleaned the rivers. No, I'm actually saying that all these things need to be dealt with concurrently, but some require a longer timeline to resolve, although they will be the basis of the sustainability of the whole exercise. So yes, you can do short-term things by trying to support people to do some things different from what they are doing now in mining. But we know just in the same way that the district assemblies have been clearing people from pavements and saying you should go and trade in the market. They've been doing it for decades, and people keep spilling onto the pavement. I mean, there's something in there which, unless those systemic, things are addressed with a kind of holistic policy thing, the efforts to clean the rivers and to drive people out of forest would be challenging, because people want to earn a living, which is quite different from being able to actually target the criminal gangs with what Jasper called semi-industrial production methods, who can dig up a forest in no time and dump loads of waste, into rivers in no time, compared to the people who really are digging these dangerous pits that they go under to try and earn a living, and the pits are collapsing on them, people's health are being destroyed and so on. Those are real. And that's really where the ordinary people are facing the hazards of Galamsey. But the crooks who are connected to power get away with it, all the time. In fact, 2 years ago, we organized a national series of conversations about this Operation Vanguard. At the last round table, we had the commander of Operation Vanguard at the meeting. And there's a lot being said about what was wrong. And I began to wonder whether this guy, this is a kind of a senior military officer, I was going to get up and blast everybody and storm off. But he was very silent. And when he took the floor, he said, you know what? We also learned a lot, in the process. First of all, this problem will not be solved by soldiers. 2, we discovered that the political protection for the most egregious cases, of Galamsey, means that really a lot of the work was an exercise in futility. And he said, I can point you to a place in a forest reserve in the Western region right now, where about 2,000 people are at work, who have been cleared and they are back because they have protection. I can point you to houses where Chinese people were arrested, and where we arrested Chinese people in the field, but who are now living in the houses, of some big people. So all that, I think that political and class element is very important. And we need to address it, however, without the xenophobia, which replaces, the liability and capability of the people who actually benefit from these alliances with the people who have become the targets of xenophobia, and also the small people who get paraded, on the front of, the newspaper pages, 3 illegal miners given 45 years in jail. Where are the bosses? That, I think, is an important question. And thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, comrade. Thank you very much for your very insightful presentation, and thank you all for your contributions and your questions. Once again, you're reminded that this meeting was hosted by the Socialist Students and Workers Network, which is a part of the International Socialist Organization Ghana, and you're invited to join. You can drop your contacts, your email addresses if you are interested, and we'll be very glad to have you. Thank you all once again for honoring this meeting with your presence. Thank you all very much. It's been very wonderful having you all. On this note, we end the meeting. Thank you once again.
Yeah, you there? You good? He's gone? Okay. Anyway, let me add my voice to Naz to thank everybody. I'm sorry, there are many people who clearly wanted to speak, couldn't get a chance. And also, I think some of the questions and comments that were put in the chat, we were not able to read out. All the same, obviously, we're all concerned about this from a variety of, interests, ecological, from the point of view of social justice, economic sustainability, and the transformation of our economy, and also that of the position of Africa more generally. In the era of climate change, ecological crisis, unprecedented inequality, these are essential concerns for everyone who is interested in just survival, let alone democracy, let alone democratic, radical democratic change and so on. So that is what we in the Socialist Students and Workers Network and the ISO are committed to, and comrades are welcome, as Na and others have said, to join us. And we meet, our online meetings take place at 4 o'clock every Sunday. And we hope we'll be hearing a lot more and engaging a lot more with all of you. I also want to thank Paps, if he's still online, from South Africa, and people like George from Liberia, others who made time to join from far-flung locations. Thank you very much. Many things we couldn't touch on, the nature of divisions within communities, the position of women, and so on and so forth. But this, I think, was an excellent starting point, and I want to thank you, all of you, once again. So have a good night, and Aluta continua. Thank you. Bye.